Peter Schiff Show.
Joining the program now, the junior senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul. Rand, welcome to the program. Rand, are you there?
I am. How are you doing today, Peter?
I am good. I'm good. So tell me about your plans with respect to the nomination of Janet Yellen, because as you know, I believe that of all the candidates that were on the president's short list, Janet Yellen was the least competent, and of course that's why the president picked her. But what are you planning on doing with respect to the confirmation hearing?
We're going to do everything we can to stop her. I probably don't have the votes or the ability to stop her, but we will slow down the process as much as possible. We would like to say that we will get out of the way and allow the process to go faster if they will give us a vote on auditing the Fed. It's been held hostage in the Senate for 3 years now. It passed overwhelmingly in the House. Every Republican and 100 Democrats passed audit the Fed. I think the American people are behind it. It's a bipartisan bill, and there's no reason why we shouldn't get a vote in the Senate. Whether or not me holding up things, it's not a permanent hold. I can't hold it. They will just have a vote, and they will roll over me. But I can make it more difficult for them to get her passed. And in doing so, maybe we can get a vote on audit the Fed, but we'll see.
I think, though, if you highlight how incompetent she was as a Fed governor, if you go back to the speeches that I've been talking about that she made in 2005 and 2006, where she was so completely oblivious to the risks in the economy, where she downplayed those risks and dismissed the criticism that others had, saying that there was no housing bubble, that there was no evidence of a bubble, that even if there was, it wouldn't matter because housing was a small part of the economy. Even if housing prices went down, which she didn't expect, she thought they would keep on going up. I think if you really focus on her lack of competence, that you might be able to find some sympathy for the argument that why should we make her the Fed chairman when she was so incompetent as a member of the Fed? Why do we want the blind leading the blind?
Well, Peter, you don't understand how they measure somebody who would be competent for the job. They look at it like this. If you were to be head of Apple Computers and you made a lot of iPods, you'd be a good CEO. If you're going to be head of the Fed and you can create lots of dollars, they think that that's a good prerequisite for the job. So the fact that, we have added $3 trillion to the Fed's asset sheets, they think that's good to create money. And so they just have a different perspective on this. So they're all loving Janet Yellen because they think she'll be somebody who will create inflation. They all want inflation now. So I think she'll be a disaster for the country. I think we're creating a new bubble in the stock market if we haven't already. I think the wealth that's gained in the stock market and the extra assets in banks are an illusion of wealth. And I think there will be a correction without ever truly getting out of the last recession. I'm afraid there could be another correction within a correction. So I think she'll be bad for the country, but I think there's probably 70 votes for her. So I don't want people to get the misconception that I can defeat her or stop her. I can temporarily derail and slow down the process, draw attention to the fact that the Fed audit's been held for 3 years and been held hostage by Harry Reid, but ultimately I probably cannot defeat her.
Well, you should be able to at least get more Republicans on board. After all, if Republicans oppose big government, it's the Federal Reserve printing all this money that is financing the big government.
You're exactly right. There will be. I think there's getting to be more Republicans coming forward, and I think that if I lead the charge on this, we can get more Republicans to oppose her nomination. So we will do everything we can, and I will try to stop it as long as I can, and I will try very hard to get audit the Fed. And I think there's an outside chance, if they're in a rush, that they will say, okay, we'll just give you a vote on audit the Fed. So, we are still pushing, and I just want people to know that every day and every way I am pushing for a vote on audit the Fed.
But I think it's a great forum. Even if we can't succeed there, we can at least succeed in shining a light on the Fed and the failures at the Fed, and in particular the failures of Janet Yellen, so that we don't continue to perpetuate the myth that she was warning about the housing bubble and warning about the financial crisis. This is a myth that's been concocted by the left to portray her as being far more competent than she really is. So let's at least, when we nominate her, let's let the public, let's let the American people know who we're nominating, because they think we're nominating somebody a lot more competent than she actually is.
I think you're exactly right, and I think that if anything, she's going to be more in favor of inflation than Bernanke was, and that's saying a lot. So, no, I think we need to be worried. We need to be worried about, inflating another bubble in our economy that will ultimately lead to more repercussions. We also need to point out that the people who suffer in recessions are the working class, those on fixed income. Those are the people who are less able to absorb a recession or a change in a readjustment to malinvestment. So really, it should be the working class that comes forward and cries out, the Fed is really helping the wealthy become more wealthy and helping and unfortunately hurting the poor and the working class.
I started calling it today trickle-down monetary policy. If you want to adopt that, I think you can, because it doesn't work. It just rains inflation on Main Street. I mean, you don't create economic wealth by enriching a few people on Wall Street with cheap money and expecting that to somehow benefit the broader economy. So we need to put an end to that myth. We need sound money, not trickle-down monetary policy.
You're exactly right.
So hopefully you can bring that cause on, and I think it will be good within the Republican Party itself as to highlight the incompetence of the Fed because the left basically hijacked the failures of 2008, and they're blaming it on capitalism, and that's why we need people like you to basically blame it on government. And what other institution is more culpable than the Federal Reserve? That's what caused these problems, not too much freedom.
Right. And that's what was mistaken in the whole thing with the housing bubble is people didn't really recognize that it wasn't so much private banks, but it was the public banks, Federal Reserve, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac that were the problem. And we're going to keep pushing on this, and we're not going to let it go easily. So we're going to put up a fight, and we're going to do everything we can to audit the Fed. And maybe I can come back on in a couple of days as we know a little more knowledge and give you some more information.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back on. I appreciate you coming out today. I understand you got to run. You got a live vote coming up. So, Rand, again, thanks for coming on the show. I'm sorry I'm going to miss you when you come here to Connecticut next week. I'm going to be out in London. Otherwise, I would have been happy to host that fundraiser maybe the next time. Again, thanks for coming by. Rand Paul, junior senator from Kentucky, a good friend of the Peter Schiff Show, and probably the best senator that we have working for the cause of freedom, the Constitution, and sound money. Hopefully, Rand does ultimately run for president. And wouldn't it be something if he could win? And, one thing about Janet Yellen being the Fed chairman is that it might help his chances considerably of winning. Because if this financial crisis happens before the next election, which is very well might happen, and if Janet Yellen is the incompetent person who steers the ship into that iceberg, who better than to criticize the government, the president that appointed her, the Senate that confirmed her, than the person who stood in opposition to that process? And I think that a real bad economic crisis with a huge outbreak of inflation is what we're going to need to elect somebody like Rand Paul. I think if the president, if the Fed, if they're somehow able to keep all the balls in the air, to somehow postpone the day of reckoning beyond the 2016 election, it's going to be hard for any Republican to win, given the dynamics of the electorate, given the overwhelming number of people who have been bought and paid for, who are living off of a government check. It's going to be very hard to outvote them unless there's a real game-changing event. And I think a economic implosion, another financial crisis worse than '08, would potentially be the catalyst to get enough voters to open up their eyes, right? Because if we just blindly move, over the next few years, with the economy steadily getting worse, right? The cost of living continuing to go up, but the government lying and pretending that it's not there. If we just continue on this trajectory, right, well, then why should the 2016 election be any different than the 2012 election? If the people weren't smart enough to figure it out in 2012, why are they going to be any brighter in 2016? They're not. They need a wake-up call. Something needs to bash them on the side of the head, to knock some sense into them. And what event might be will be another crisis, this time on President Obama's watch, and with his hand-picked nominee, Janet Yellen, steering the ship at the Fed. That's what we need. I don't know how the president's going to end up blaming that on George Bush. Maybe or try to blame it on the brinksmanship of the Republican Party during the debt ceiling debate or the government shutdown. No. If we have a real financial crisis, a real economic crisis, the president is going to own it. The Democrats are going to own it. And if the Republicans want to have enough distance between themselves and that crisis, they got to stand up now. It's the ones that can be the most critical of these monetary policies and these fiscal policies and be consistent in their criticism, not just criticizing Obama, but criticizing George Bush, criticizing the mainstream in the Republican Party. Rand Paul says he thinks there's only going to be 30 people in the Senate opposing Janet Yellen. There's a lot more than 30 Republicans in the United States Senate. Why are any Republicans rubber stamping that nomination, right? So those Republicans, they're part of the problem too. And I think what you're going to need to do to be a credible presidential candidate and win with an R next to your name is you've got to have enough integrity to criticize other Republicans, to criticize the Republican majority. So you're not just a shill or a party hack, but you're a statesman. You're a man of principle. Right? You're somebody that Democrats can vote for, even though they're Democrats, or that independents can vote for, because you're just not a shill. They know that you stand for something. And more importantly, you also stand against big government and the Federal Reserve and all the problems that they've created. And you can run a campaign based on freedom and individual liberty, right? And the Constitution. I know Rand is the guy that can do that. Hopefully he gets that chance. And again, for all of our sakes, I hope this financial crisis happens sooner rather than later. Not only because it makes it raises the odds that we could elect someone like Rand Paul or Rand Paul, but the sooner the crisis happens, the better. Let's get it out of the way. Let's get it over with. Let's stop making the problems bigger so we can start solving the problems. But we can't solve the problems until that crisis hits. In the meantime, we just make the problems bigger and bigger, and so the further into the future we get the crisis, the more painful it's going to be for everybody when we have to solve it.